So welcome to the next episode of the Rafe Foreman podcast, and we're going to give you an update on the podcast that we finished with last week, and that is the jury trial that we just finished last night. As a matter of fact, I got home after midnight this morning, so I'm talking to you on fumes. Not much sleep. But the case was Luis Andrade versus Adams and Barclay Pools, and you may wonder, how can you talk about that? It's public record. This was a public trial. This is not a settlement. It's a $3.2 million verdict for the plaintiff against Adams and Barclay Pools. And the reason I give you the context is because I told you we were going to try this case the last episode. And I want to give you an update, but I want to tell you some exciting new things that we did that we learned a lot from and will probably continue to do. One of the things is we objected to the e-jury panel. And, of course, opposing counsel opposed us, but we had a full-blown hearing. And what happened was e-jury panels encourage more educated people and people with computer savvy sense, because you have to have a computer or a smartphone to fill out the application and your jury forms. And Susan Hutchison, my partner, and I, mainly Susan with my support, have been complaining about e-jurors don't accurately represent a cross-section of the community. And so we represented Luis Andrade, who is a manual laborer. He builds pools, sprays gunite, does coping and tiling, plastering, just whatever job they have for him. And to give you an idea of what these guys that actually spray the gunite make, they make $70 per pool flat fee. Doesn't matter how long it takes, $70 is all they make. And there's only 7 or 8 guys on the gunite crew. So AB Pools is getting away with very low margins and very high profit margins. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about is the lack of the jury array in representing a cross-section of the community. Of the 42 jurors that we had seated, there were only 2 who were similar to Mr. Andrade. And that means they had a high school or less education, and they were manual laborers. We had 3 PhDs, 3 doctors on our jury panel. We had 12 master's degrees on our jury panel, and all the rest had at least a bachelor's. The interesting thing is, in Tarrant County, the Hispanic population is 32% in Tarrant County, yet we had 16% represented on our panel. The black population is something like 22%. We had 11% on our panel. And the higher educated than a high school diploma in Tarrant County was 58%, and yet on our panel it was almost 90%. And so you can see that because of the e-panel requirement of a computer or a smartphone, you're losing a good majority, not a majority, but we got half of the Hispanics, half of the blacks, and twice as many educated people as were represented by the population surveys of the last census. And so what does that mean? That means that people who look like, sound like, work like our client are way underrepresented on the panel. And so we filed and had a hearing contesting the e-jury panel, which was denied. But I think there needs to be a study. Every county should be required to track this, because this is happening in every jurisdiction in the country, especially in Texas. And if nobody's keeping track, everybody just thinks, oh, this is a simple thing. Well, it came up during the hearing that everybody has a smartphone because during COVID they had to use their smartphone to make orders at the local restaurant. And our argument to that is, are you kidding me? There's a lot of people who never have ordered out with an app. I'm included in that number. just because there's an app that you can order food from doesn't mean that you're using it. Number two, it doesn't mean that you're willing to fill out this information on the jury questionnaire. So then we compared it with our last trial that we just had in the court next door. Literally next door was our last trial. And we had the statistics for what the old-fashioned hand fill out the forms were, and it was unbelievably revealing. The old-fashioned fill it out and mail it in method was more accurately representative of the cross-section of the community than were the e-jurors. So be careful. On the other hand, it was very convenient to get the juror cards on Friday instead of being handed them on Monday morning. Because we got them on Friday, we were allowed an excellent opportunity to use social media resources and tools to discover who these people were, who were these 42 people that were going to come to our jury panel on Monday morning. We have two law clerks, and I got to tell you that they did an excellent job, because when the jury walked into the courtroom, I recognized many of them because I had seen their pictures on Facebook materials that our law clerks were able to see. Now, I want you to be careful about this because there's some ethical concerns here. You can't friend a person who is on your panel. That's unethical, and it's a disbarable offense, in my opinion. If they are blocked, in other words, they don't share their information with anybody but their close friends or whatever, there's a limitation. You may not be able to see them. You may not be able to find them. But many of the people, probably like me, because I don't know how to put these filters on, have their information available to anybody in the public. And those that we were able to look at were very revealing. We learned who was in the NRA, who was wearing Confederate flag shirts, who was maybe in the ACLU, who was in favor of Black Lives Matter and who was opposed to Black Lives Matter. I mean, we really did a comprehensive search. We had some jurors that had on their post that Blue Lives Matter, and so we know that that's a police officer or big supporter of the police. We had others that said Black Lives Matter, and I just want to give you the opportunity to review the public information that's out there. Now, not only can you look at Facebook, I guess there are other accounts that I'm not even intelligent enough to know about. Something about Twitter, maybe Instagram. I don't know what that is. But these two young law clerks, they know what it is, and they could look at what was public information. Now, I'm old-fashioned. I rely and have always relied on the Central Appraisal District in the county. So we were in Tarrant County, so we went to the Tarrant County Appraisal District, and you can literally type in the name of your juror, and it will tell you what real property they own in the county. And we used that on every single juror. So we knew that we had two jurors who lived in South Lake, which we have had reports that is the most expensive, exclusive town in Texas. We had multi-million-dollar homes, two of them in South Lake. We also had people who lived in Haltom City, who lived in an area where homes were valued at $40,000 to $45,000 a piece. Now, what do you do with that information? Well, it depends on who your client is. It depends on what your case is. It depends on what your case is about. But if you want a cross-section of people that relate to your client, if your client lives in a rental unit and doesn't have a car and has to walk to work, he's probably not going to have much in common with the gated community juror that you have on the panel. Now, that doesn't mean that the gated community juror is not appropriate for the case, but in our estimation, after talking to the jurors, they were not appropriate for our panel. So, use that social media. I can't tell you, and this is the most comprehensive. We've looked at them. Tried to for an hour or two, and I guess an old dog like me's not good at it. But you get these young law clerks that lived on social media their entire life, and they can find public information on people that I didn't even know existed. So, armed with that information, we came to voir dire at 9 o'clock in the morning. But I want to talk to you about a strategy move that Susan and I employed this time. We had 42 jurors. And, of course, if you know how voir dire works in a district court case where, such as this, each side's going to get 6 strikes, and the next 12 after the strikes are going to be seated. So the active splash zone for the jury starts at 24. And for every person you get struck for cause, it increases by that number. And my strategy was I wanted to pick our 12 out of the first 28 jurors. I did not want to go past 28, and the reason was because juror 29 to 42 had several objectionable folks in it, and we didn't want to get that far. And so we made a strategy move not to try to consciously not go past juror number 28, and we were successful. The first 12 jurors seated on the jury stopped at number 26, so we met our goal. We felt good about the jury. We had 8 females and 4 males. We had, I believe, 7 minorities on the jury. And so even though we started out with a panel that was totally disrepresentative of this community, we felt like the jury that we impaneled was more closely related to the demographics of the community where we were.
Do you think the ethnic makeup of the panel goes through the mind of opposing counsel at all when they're doing voir dire? I
know it went through the minds of these opposing counsels because we got a mistrial in November where they struck every single person of color, and that's illegal under the Batson decision. And we filed a Batson challenge, and the judge granted it and declared a mistrial. And this was our second go. So I know they considered it.
But would you say typically in a majority of your cases, does opposing counsel ever take in jury makeup when they're doing voir dire, or what are they just strictly trying to eliminate a certain viewpoint?
I think they are trying to eliminate a certain viewpoint. I think it's across the board, depending on how qualified and how experienced opposing counsel is. I think they take it into consideration just as much as I do. I think some of the lesser experienced counsel that I've had the experience of practicing against maybe make judgment calls based on race, socioeconomic values that may or may not be accurate, but they paint with a broad brush, and that is what is illegal. Because if you have a person of color, it's not a representative panel if you have all white jurors. And the courts in Texas have considered education to be a factor as well. So a person who doesn't have a high school education is not being judged by a group of his peers if they're all PhD and master degree. Yeah. And so it's important for you to take those things into consideration. But let me tell you, we find it difficult to have engineers on the jury. And we had an engineer on our jury this time. And it was a unanimous verdict, including the engineer. And he wore a mask the entire time, but he was very expressive with his eyes, paid very close attention. And I have no idea what the jury deliberated on or what they did. They deliberated for about 4 hours in arriving at their decision. And it was unanimous. And so I just think you got to be careful about judging people by their race, by their social economic background, by their education level, by their job experience. Now, don't think I'm being crazy. If you're suing somebody for discrimination, and this was a workers' comp discrimination and perception of disability case. If you're suing a company that has a lot of manual laborers that have had this problem before, and you got their HR director sitting over there on your jury panel, it's probably not a good idea to put them on there, because this might be a little too close to what they do every day for a living. Just be careful and talk to people. We had our list of people that we thought would be objectionable on paper, and we changed our mind on a couple. Some of them stayed true to form, but some of them we had to change our mind. And it's because you just got to talk to people. And you know, the judge said that this was the most talkative jury panel she's had in a long time. Well, that's what the last judge said, and that's what the last judge said. And the problem is, it's not that it's a talkative jury panel. It's about, I know how to get them to talk. And I'm not bragging, but that's what the common denominator is that Susan and I fashion our questions and our voir dire in such a way that encourages people to talk and participate. And we found that to be true with this jury, like we find it to be true with every jury.
Right.
And so why do you want to talk to them? Well, because I'll give you an example. We have social media information that one juror, for example, this is hypothetical, has a husband that likes NASCAR, has a lot of pictures with rebel flags, might not be, and is white, might not be as open-minded against a Hispanic manual laborer as you'd like for him to be, but this is his wife. And so the question is, do you believe that his values carry over to the wife? And I found that they did not in this case. She was very open-minded. She was very willing to listen, and she actually participated on the jury. So I just think you have to be careful and not just judge people. You know, don't use your bias and prejudice trying to weed out the bias and prejudice that you perceive on the panel.
There's just a link that I made right there. People who are more likely to post stuff like rebel flags and things like that,
right?
Those are more likely to be blue-collar, low-income workers than educated people.
Okay.
So it's quite possible that you actually had, even though someone would post something like that, they actually may be more aligned with your client on other factors that would probably be more important to that person than race.
I agree with that, and I want to talk about this just a minute. I don't want to get controversial, but I know people that have rebel flag shirts and flags and maybe a sticker on their car, and they're not doing that because they support slavery. I know them well. They're doing that because they believe that they are sons or daughters of the South, and they, are from this area, and it's a pride thing that. Now, I understand that some people perceive it as a racial statement, but I just don't find that everybody that has it is making a racial statement. And so I'm willing to be open and ask them about it and let them be willing to talk to me about it. We also had a confrontation. It always seems that I have a juror that'll confront me. This was I'm not going to call his number because, well, it's confidential. Juror number 1, I guess, hated me, which is, unfortunately, usually there's 1 or 2 or 3. He said something about use your common sense, and I said, you know how I feel about common sense. Matter of fact, I used this in my closing argument and in my voir dire, and I said, common sense, I don't know what that means. And he says, that is abundantly clear to me. And I said, so you think I don't have any common sense? And he said he kind of avoided the answer. And then when I pinned him on it, you're telling me in front of this jury that you think I don't have any common sense. And he wouldn't answer, but it was obvious to everybody, and everybody heard what he said, so he had to go. But my objection to common sense is everybody arrives at their own common sense based on their own personal education, experiences, yada, yada, yada. And so everybody's common sense is different. And I find that when a lawyer asks a jury to use their common sense, they're saying, I don't have any evidence or argument or law to support me, so I'm asking you to use your bias and make this decision. And I told the jury this in closing. I said, did you hear any evidence? And I told you this in voir dire. Did you hear any evidence today about, or during this trial, this whole week, about what common sense is? No, you didn't. Did you see it in the jury charge of the law that the judge just gave you? No, you did not. And so don't let him appeal to your bias. You decide this case on what you promised me in voir dire, and that's on the law and the facts that were presented in this trial, not on your common sense, which was not presented in this trial. And I think they got it. I really do. And opposing counsel made a big deal out of me doing this in voir dire. He acted like he couldn't understand it, and he objected and thought it was inappropriate or whatever. But the fact that he did that just allowed me to explain it and emphasize it even more.
To everybody.
So everybody got it.
Yeah.
And
then you just got to use it like it was a sharpened knife or something.
Well,
just every time you got to use it, everybody knew exactly what was going on. It's just working,
We also, because we wanted to use pick our first 12 and the first 26, we had to be really cautious and selective about who we moved for a cause strike against and who we used a peremptory strike against. Now, here's what was going on. They struck a lot of people for cause past number 28. Well, we didn't care about that because it doesn't matter who you strike after we've closed the gate. They're not getting into the rodeo. And so it really was a great strategy move that Susan and I thought about. And I don't mean great because we thought of it. It felt really good. Let me rephrase that. It felt really good to have a plan, execute the plan, and it worked so well in the end.
So I can imagine the feeling is probably similar to executing a strategy. This is the only way I can connect. Is like executing a strategy in a game of spades or going low in 42 or something like that.
Exactly. If you throw the ace of spades out there, that they're going to throw their low spades out, and then your queen might not be any good because somebody's got the king. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I could see if somebody throws something off suit and you're on the other side going, "What? That's dumb."
Right.
But go for it. I mean, I support you in that. So
right. And so we got the jury seated, and I'll just tell you, Susan did such a great job in opening that I think the case was over in opening. But she did such a great job on the first witness cross-examining her that it was over after the first witness. Because the themes and the things that we talked about with the jury on voir dire, we talked about relevant things. We didn't talk about imaginary, I'm not trying to criticize anybody that I've seen in the past, and I've done this in the past too, so I'm saying it to myself. But what shows do you watch? I used to put a lot of credit in what shows people watched because we had 3 networks. We didn't have cable TV. We didn't have internet. We didn't have any streaming. I don't even watch TV anymore. I mean, I watch YouTube and I watch whatever I can get on Amazon Prime. That's what I watch. And so I don't know what people are watching. Number 2, I don't know how to find out what they're watching because the Nielsen ratings never call me and they never give me their data. And so I don't know. I haven't had much luck with what do you watch. But, for example, if half the room says they like to watch CSI, that means they probably like criminal investigation shows that have whodunit kind of a twist to it, and they can figure out who did it and stuff like that. But what I'm more interested in is who has been discriminated in their workplace or who has been accused of discrimination. And I asked that question, and we had jurors that it applied to. They have been accused of discrimination. Well, if you're a manager that has had an allegation lodged against you that you discriminated against an employee, you might be a little biased on this case where we have an employee alleging the same thing against his supervisor.
Yeah.
And so that's what Susan and I really try to talk about, is the stuff that is really going to be an issue in this case. And I don't know if anybody liked it or not. I mean, the case worked out great. We got a wonderful verdict. We had a wonderful jury. And so but you can't attribute success to everything you do just because you won. But one of the things that I thought we picked up on in voir dire, in this case particularly, was that this was a pretty happy jury panel. And I asked them about their primary emotion. And I was surprised to find out how many of them were admittedly happy people. But I found that to be true, especially of the 12 that we had on the box. They were happy, content people. They didn't have an agenda. They weren't haters. They didn't have somebody that they had to, vote for or against, Yeah, they didn't seem to have an agenda. They were just open-minded, good, fair, honest people, and that's exactly what you want on a voir dire and on a jury panel. So, in conclusion for this episode, let me just say that you really have got to be a student of people, what their nature is, what their reactions are, what their thoughts and opinions are, of course. But what I really want to know is, how do they solve problems? Because we have a problem here and the jury has to solve it. And I want to know what factors, and I told them this. I said, I want to know what factors factor into your decision-making process, because if bias and prejudice factor into how you're going to decide this problem, then maybe you're not the best juror for this case. We want you to decide it based on open-minded, fair observation of the facts and the law. And I think they did. No, I know they did. I mean, they were so in tune. They were so engaged. They weren't sleeping. They weren't bored. They were ready to do justice. That concludes this episode of Rafe Foreman Podcast, and I wish you good luck on your next voir dire. Please join us every Tuesday and Thursday for new podcasts and new materials. And also, we hope you'll support us on Patreon, and we will have exclusive materials, lessons, teachings, and even videos coming soon. Good verdicts to all.